Hi, everybody. It's Brian Walker, CEO and founder of Retail Doctor Group, and welcome to another exciting edition of The Future of Retail. And in this series and in this particular podcast, I like to speak to industry influencers, luminaries, not just from the field of retail, but consumer, brand, marketing, technology, and really get a feel for their lens on where to from here. So the gentleman I'm about to introduce, I've had the pleasure of working with and listening to for quite a while now. And whilst he's younger in years, he's broad in experience. So without much further ado, I'll introduce you to Dr. Jason Pallant. I'll let Jason talk a little bit further about himself. He's a part of the marketing and business faculty of RMIT, and he certainly brings both the academic and the practitioner lens. So Jason, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've spent my career following you. You got the Retail Doctor name before I did my PhD in retail. So when I went looking for, names for Twitter, now X, all the good ones were taken because of you. So credit to you. But no, it's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, I'm currently part of RMIT University. So I teach marketing there. I'm on what they call a pracademic role, and that it's a mashup of practitioner and academic. I spend some of my time at the university. I spend some of my time out in industry doing industry practical things, but a lot related to retail, consumer behavior, customer experience from a research and insight standpoint, particularly a little bit of teaching and also some strategic consulting. So it's a pleasure to be here and talk about the future of retail.
Well, thank you. Let's start at the start. As we move into the next phase of AI, as we start to talk about the role of media, technology, and the disruptive nature as it influences what we know as traditional retail. Some might argue as a starting point that the technology will be so overwhelming and so omnipotent that the role of we humans will be diminished dramatically. And if I fast forward 15 to 20 years, do you think that's a reality?
So broadly, I kind of think the opposite for a few reasons, right? Absolutely, like any technology, right? It has effects. It takes away some of the stuff that we do, right? The computer did the same thing. The internet did that, mobile phones, et cetera, right? So absolutely, things are changing because of AI. But I'm also extremely convinced that in many ways, that makes us as humans and what truly makes us humans, right? The things we're absolutely best at, social connection, right? Understanding nuance, emotions, feelings, relationships. All of that stuff actually, to me, becomes even more important in a world where we're all going to have, and already do in many aspects, have access to data, tech, and AI, right? And so currently one of my jobs at the uni is to build out new courses and an entirely new major for our marketing students, right? Around the role of technology. And I think what's fascinating about that is the way that we're approaching it is to say all of the principles, right? The stuff that makes up what marketing and also retail are still critical, and in fact, even more important, because we can now all generate a whole bunch of stuff with AI. We can all analyze a whole bunch of data really quickly with AI. And so what separates out marketers, brands, retailers is how do they apply all of those tools to solve human problems, right? Connect with humans in a meaningful way.
And as I listen to you, Jason, I think to myself, if we were setting off on a trek to Mount Everest, I'm not even sure we'd be anywhere near base camp with this technology. And does your argument change as virtual reality, augmented reality, the famous metaverse, our avatars doing everything for us, Mr. Musk's robotics, and so on? As this technology advances, does the role of the human in that interaction, does it diminish? Does it become more important?
Yeah, so I still think it becomes more important, right? And if I draw a recent retail analogy for you, right? It's self-checkouts, right? We think about the evolution of self-checkouts, particularly in grocery. And when that was kind of a new emerging technology, we had kind of some similar conversations, right? What does this mean for staff? What does this mean for, the human beings in stores, right? And yes, it changed the nature of some of those jobs. Now we've got people kind of overseeing and helping the self-checkouts. We might have slightly less people scanning products, right? But fast forward some years, every grocery store, apart from a couple of Amazon ones that make the news every so often, but every grocery store still has human checkouts. And in fact, many brands are taking out their self-checkouts or investing less in them because shoppers, as human beings, have kind of had enough of being told off by the technology that we've got the wrong item in our bag, and we just want to talk to a human, right? And so to me, we're going to see, and we are seeing the same thing with AI. It's human nature.
Are you ready for one more provocation?
Yeah, please. That's what we're here for.
If Mr. Musk has his way, for example, there'll be in the future 5, perhaps 10% of the population, admittedly quite wealthy, who'll send their robot along in autonomous vehicles to do the shopping for them. Or they'll have such AI, and I know we'll touch on this, such merchandise inventory personalization algorithms that they won't be the initiator of the purchase, the supermarket will be. In fact, that's what they're still called. But to the first part, there's an example of the time that I would take to have that human experience being replicated by a robot. And is that one of the future trends, do you think?
Yeah, I think it might be, but I also kind of hear that story and kind of feel sorry for those people, right? Like, what a boring, lonely life that would be sitting at home and send your robot out to do stuff, right? Like, where do you get the discovery? Where do you
You see,
touch a
it's
thing?
opportunity. Yes, but it's opportunity cost of time, isn't it? So if I'm a mountain skier versus going shopping, my vicarious pecuniary or utility will come out of the skiing if my robot can take care of the shopping. So it's horses for courses, I agree.
It is, and look, we shouldn't undersell the impact of technology. Like, there will be a lot of those repeat predictable purchases, right? And the same thing with online shopping, the same thing with click and collect. It's done this. It's where it's taken over mostly is stuff that you know that you need. You need it on repeat with some kind of predictable frequency. That's great. Absolutely, right? Like my dog food, right? We had to get a special diet for him recently. It's like, yeah, I don't want to have to think about and forget that I need that dog food, right? Like, yeah, I'll do an online subscription. I just want it to get delivered, right? But there's so much more to human existence. There's so much more to retail than, repeatable transactional interactions.
And so that lends itself to this concept of the retail environment, doesn't it? So whilst we've all grown up with this concept of shopping centers and shops, inventory, all this starts to transform. So to your point about social and human instinct, I agree. And already we're seeing the early track work, aren't we, on shopping centers, if you like, migrating to community hubs, being places to hang out, where the local gallery is, whatever it might be. And so I think that there's a fairly safe course to run that says that will only evolve. And much more of the integration of those environments into our daily lives, that is, into my residence centre or whatever it might be. But it does ultimately, do you think, Jason, talk to the decline of the number of physical retail outlets we have?
Yeah, I think the number of purely transactional shops, right, declining, right? And what I mean by that is, to your point, We're seeing so much more mixed space, right? Retail, but even within stores, right? I think it's that move away from every store having to stock every item in every size, and what a store is some shelves or racks with a bunch of products on them that people come and grab them, right? I think we'd already been seeing for years that we're evolving from that into a much more social, experiential format of a store, and that is where we can be really benefited by technology, right? Because I might not need to stock everything in store because I can get it to consumers very quickly, right? And so the store is about the live, lived product experience, right? Let me feel it, touch it, taste it, whatever the product is. I don't necessarily have to buy it and put it in a bag right this second. Actually, it might be more convenient for me that it's waiting for me at home by the time I get there, or it might be in the car park, right? Like I think that's where we're kind of seeing less of that purely transactional, quote unquote, store.
Yeah, and yes, and Jason, I think one of the paradoxes that distribution and retailers and wholesalers will need to contemplate further is, whilst I might not need that same level of scale of physical outlets in order to serve my B2C customer, they produce my only real ability to get product to people in a shortest and fastest point of distance and time. And so does that lend itself to rethinking distribution channels, rethinking the role of property, rethinking this whole online space? But by then, of course, we'll probably have drones that'll do a certain amount of this anyway. So, if you sort of put on the crystal ball, there are some interesting sort of places and sort of conversation points for retailers to really think about in terms of their asset investment. And therefore, sales may no longer be one of the metrics by which they invest.
Yeah, so actually, I wrote collabed on a thought leadership piece about this coming out shortly around what should we be measuring in retail, and particularly in physical retail, right? Because so much of the value of a physical store isn't currently measured, right? So now, obviously, right, caveat is your business has to make money, right? So absolutely, you need to make sure you're getting sales and foot traffic. But it's like, how do you measure that by walking past a store and seeing the window and the visual merchandise, you inspired a consumer to go and think about something or investigate a new product category, right? Like that's so hard to measure. We probably never will, but that's such a impact that a store can have, right? Is that you actually can immerse people and trigger new thoughts, feelings, desires in such a more powerful way because you can appeal to all of the senses and not just one when we are online, right? Which is sight. So yeah, absolutely. I think when we think about measuring stores and what impact they have, right, it's got to go beyond sales per square foot or however we're kind of traditionally doing it.
One of the pieces I sort of intimated, I think, was this idea that you and I as customers initiate the transaction.
Mm-hmm.
But the faster technology enables retailers to gather data, have data, that predictive algorithm really starts to, I mean, that's the essence of AI, I guess, in that sense, really starts to take credence, doesn't it? And then we start to think, well, of a consumer's day-to-day life into the future, 60 to 70% is going to fall within that bandwidth, such as your dog food example. Now that changes it enormously. And if I was going to be controversial about it, I'd even wonder about the role of B2C retail as we know it. And I think we're already starting to see that disintermediation of the supply channel.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to see that data and technology will enable product to get to consumers far more quickly and increasingly fast. And then we'll have perhaps a plateau of retail that will be all about the experience of the brand, but it'll be more at that 30% level. You know, if I'm going to sort of draw straws. Does that sound a rational proposition for the future, or flawed?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, it does make sense. I think what's interesting about that is we know from human nature, right, that when we have lots and lots of one thing, eventually we kind of hit a tipping point where the pendulum swings the other way and we look for the other stuff, right? So you talked about there's personalization, right, at scale. So I'm talking about predicting what people will want when they want it and just serving that exact thing up, right? That's amazing for convenience, right? So like for my dog food, great, right?
Toothpaste, dog food, books, whatever it might be. Yes.
Awesome, right? But for me as a human, there becomes a point, right, which we haven't really kind of got really great at understanding why or how. We just kind of have enough. Like if you bombard me with the same thing, right? And then I actually kind of want to go back to the opposite side. So that's the interesting thing about personalization, right? And when you talk about it being really in a data-driven way, right, is that you start giving more and more people more and more of exactly what they want, and you get more and more niche, right? It loses its power over time because we kind of get sick of it. Now, I think about this with like Spotify, right? Once Spotify hones in on a genre or an artist or something that you want, no matter what else you play, you'll notice it starts feeding you more and more of that thing that you want. Now, the best way for me to get sick of something is play it to me 10 times in a day, right? It's the reason that radio still does their kind of no repeat workday, right? It's like we just get sick of stuff over time. And that's the risk of going fully down that kind of data-driven personalization as the only strategy, is that you get more and more and more niche, and you kind of lose all of this other opportunity for stuff that consumers might have been interested in, but you'd never talk to them about because you've put them in this more and more niche thing of this person buys this dog food on this date, and that's it.
And so if that is the case, you know, we know already, for example, that, you know, our friends at Amazon tell us that 60% of all commodity type purchasing, groceries, for example, is absolutely habitual. And often when I'm speaking to an audience, I might ask the audience if they've changed their toothpaste or whatever it might be. And we are creatures of habit, you know. So I think there's absolutely this scale up, scale off model that's looming. The other thing that's interesting is the rise of media, for example. You know, the rise of Prime, the rise of streaming, the constant idea of this community, and really offsetting or valuing my time. And if you want to take that to the next interesting piece, and if you take a slightly dystopic view of AI, it will transform, some believe, the way we work going forward, the nature and composition of roles into the future, not to say less roles, but just rebalanced. And it will potentially underpin the, if you like, the classification of what it is to work. The question in the future is, will that give us more free time for shopping? Or are we currently getting maximized to have less time for shopping?
So the optimist in me says, I hope, just be great that AI is doing all of our kind of mundane, repetitive tasks, and then we get to use that free time to do, you know, valuable human things.
Yeah.
The pragmatist tells me that every time we've had a new technology that's made us faster, employers and businesses have found a way to just increase the expectations to just so that we still keep filling that time, right? But I think that is the interesting space where, going back to some things we talked about earlier, where that kind of human nature becomes even more important to me, right? Because if we all have these amazing AI tools, right? And kind of some of, we already have some really pretty great ones for certain tasks, right? Creating ad copy, for example, right? Like I can get any of the large language models to write me 100 taglines in a couple of seconds, right? So the ability to kind of do those kind of tasks absolutely has changed. But doing them well, right, and doing ones that will work, actually, to me, means true expertise has become more important, because faced with 100 taglines that have been confidently created by an AI model, how do you pick which one?
Yeah.
Right? Or how do you give it the right context to know that what you actually need is a tagline and not the body of the copy or a different website design? Or, how do you point it in the right direction? And so when I think about the nature of work, I do see us doing less easily repeatable tasks, but still actually the expertise in that thing becoming even more important.
Yeah, it's a nice answer. And as we sort of start to move through this, the piece you touched on, personalization, is intriguing to me, because at one level, we talk more and more about personalization, yet our brands are becoming more and more generalist through marketplaces. And I wonder, is that entirely congruent?
Yeah. I mean, the short answer is no, right? And I think what is so interesting about that, we talked about experience, right? Is it's kind of everything we're talking about is kind of what we predicted when we started talking about the experience economy, right? So there's this article in the late 90s, Pine and Gilmore did this, I think it was Harvard Business Review. And they go, welcome to the experience economy, right? And they're talking about how economies have shifted over time, and we're all trying to compete on products. And then we realized we could copy each other's products. So then everybody's competing on service. And then we realized we can kind of copy services. So now people are trying to compete on experiences, right? And then the next one, spoiler alert, right, is transformation. Like, what actual impact do you have on consumers' lives, right? So that kind of shift, and why we're talking so much about experience and personalization, all that kind of stuff, and giving a better tailored experience, is because now that's harder to copy for a competitor, right? And so to link it back to the question you actually asked me, right? That the challenge I see when we think about, okay, well, I've just got to get my product, I'm going to go onto the marketplaces like everybody else. So we're back to competing on product, right? Like, what experience, what are you giving people through those channels that is different, right? Now, the people that talk about physical and mental availability, right, and scale, right? There's absolutely, being on those things, being visible, giving people more opportunities to see your products and brand, right, is very important. That's how you take up kind of mental space for consumers. But it can't be the be all and end all to competing or standing out, right? Because you're reduced to a searchable list of products and brands. How do you stand out?
How do you stand out?
Asking me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think, right, and this is why I kind of love this topic, right? And I'm hosting a things at the uni shortly about marketing then and now. And
Yes.
it's actually about going back to basics, because when we're talking so much about personalization now, right? If you think back to a traditional retail store or a market stall, right? That was personalized. The shop owner knows all the people in the area, knows their order, knows their family, and has the product ready. That's personalization, right? So we're talking about that still now. We're just talking about it with technology. So I think it keeps coming back to that idea of knowing what problems you are solving for your customers, right? What value are you truly providing, and then providing that better than anybody else, whether you do that in personalization, whether you do that by mass scale, convenience, whatever. But it's kind of going back to the basics.
It is at one level. I see a future where scale personalization will eminently be the larger end of town.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have the niche artisans type retail. And then that piece in the middle is feeling increasingly grey to me around the future of where that will exist, because we probably won't have as many assets to house them in. They won't have capability or differentiation on scale, but they will have it on the niche type aspects of their product. So the interesting irony is that personalization will become scale.
And I think so often when we hear it today, that is what people are talking about. They're talking about that when I log into my Netflix, it looks very different from yours. It looks very different from my wife's, my kids. But as you say, that is a scale thing, because Netflix have so many assets that they need to do that, right? Because if you saw the entire database of shows and movies, you'd be overwhelmed and leave immediately, right? Yeah. So bigger brands need to do it more. But the core idea of personalization being about understanding who your customers are, what their needs, wants, preferences, and tailoring it for them, tailoring their experience of you and your brand and your products to them, absolutely applies to everybody. It's just the form that takes looks quite different at different ends.
Well, Jason, from one doctor of retail to the retail doctor, thank you very much. I think, what I draw from this is this great sense of purpose and optimism about the future for humans in the retail environment, the evolving role of brand and its architecture, its attributes, and what it means. And certainly, I think, perception, and I think rightfully so, that the fundamentals will stay in place, the context will change.
I think that's a great summary, right? And the final note that I would make for any retailers out there is that so much of what we talked about applies to frontline employees and staff, right? And actually the opportunity to leverage those people and augment, not replace, but empower and augment those people with data technology, right, is actually where you have the massive opportunity to learn about customers, right, tailor the experience to that customers, and actually do that kind of personalization and experience. And so I think that's a really massive area, right, of opportunity for local retailers particularly, is actually treating frontline staff in a much more strategic way, not as a cost to be reduced. That's my final.
Nice.
Mini rant.
Let's have another session in the not too distant future, Jason, and perhaps we could have our avatars attend if we haven't got the time.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll set mine up.
Well, I can tell you in my case, they're always 5 kilos lighter and there's no wrinkles. In your case, you're already there.
Oh, very kind. Thank you.
Thank you again, Jason. Dr.
Thanks,
Jason
Brian.
Pallant, RMIT. Terrific session. Thank you.